Okay, thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to pass this along to Anita Siegel.
Good afternoon. I'm Anita Siegel. I'm an attorney at Siegel and Bergman in Morristown, New Jersey. I'm a member of the Professional Advisor Network Committee of the Jewish Community Foundation of Greater Metro West. And I've been on the board of the Jewish Community Foundation for 25 years or so, and they just decided I termed out for the first time. I am so happy to be joined by a wonderful panel of experts in charitable planning and working with clients to help them with their philanthropic endeavors as part of their estate plan matters. First, we have Mike Levin, who's the co-founder of Jewish Future Pledge, which we'll be learning about here today. Edward Beckwith, a partner at Baker Hostetler in Washington, D.C., a trust and estates attorney with a substantial charitable practice, who will be helping with us. And Donald Kent, a principal at Bernstein Private Wealth Management and a financial advisor. Please stay muted and use the chat feature if you have any questions that you'd like to ask of the panelists. We will reserve a few minutes at the end for questions and answers, so use the chat feature for that purpose, please. We're going to start with an easy poll question, and hopefully that poll will come up on your screen. From your perspective, how important is it to discuss philanthropy with your clients? Very important, somewhat important, not very important, or not at all important? Well, we're so glad to see that most of you think it's very important. That's great. So our first question is the role of an advisor. If we take a holistic approach to our client's best interests, we'll want to ensure that philanthropy is part of the conversation. Advisors are obligated to educate our clients. Okay, I think we can, yes, I said, okay. Advisors are obligated to educate their clients on all issues with respect to the client's estate plan matters, including charity and how it can be a part of their estate plan. This panel will explore why charitable conversations are important, a new way to start a charitable conversation with your Jewish clients, namely using the Jewish Future Pledge that we're going to be talking about. And we will mention later some tax-efficient planning tips for philanthropically inclined clients. I most often ask clients if they have any particular charities that they support during their lives that they'd like to remember in their estate plan when we're talking about their estate plan. Clients often do not connect the two, lifetime support and inclusion in the estate plan. And it sounds like a surprise to them when I raise the question. If the client mentions one or more Jewish causes, then I'll bring up the Jewish Future Pledge in the context of the charitable planning discussion. They don't realize that the charitable planning can be very much a part of their estate plan. The charitable conversation can become very important. It can strengthen our relationship with our clients, since it's not necessarily something they think about in connection with their estate plan matters, and as it impacts planning for their descendants and the generations. It also expands the client's view of what can be accomplished with their wealth, in addition to helping their client's family and loved ones. So now I'm going to turn it to Mike. Mike Levin, a co-founder of the Jewish Future Pledge, is going to speak with us about how and why the Jewish Future Pledge got started. But first, a short video. Evan?
Just give me 1 second.
Okay.
Just a second.
Well, I can do video.
No sound.
Can we do something about the sound?
Are you not hearing it?
No,
I'm not.
Oh,
nobody's hearing.
sorry. Give me 1 second. Let me try this again.
I grew up in a very, very Jewish environment. I couldn't write on Saturday. We couldn't light a stove. It was lit on Friday afternoon. Every Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, a little old man came with a long beard, took the Jewish little blue box out and gave us a new blue box. Then I went away from Jewishness. Never went back to my roots until I was 48 years old.
I think growing up too, it was fairly traditional view of Judaism. We were all bar mitzvahed, we went to Jewish camp, but the bigger picture of, the importance of Judaism really didn't come into focus till much later.
I came home and I said to Andrea, I'm going to start a Jewish donor advised fund there. You need each kid's name and my name. And Andrea said to me, how do you know that they're going to spend the money Jewishly? And I said, I don't. I never thought before Andrea had told me this, that I could restrict it Jewishly.
This is our money that we are leaving to them. I want at least 50%, and I would prefer more, but 50% to go to Jewish causes. That's non-negotiable.
We're all down here, and my dad gathered us all, and my mom, and they sat down and told us what their idea was.
Or giving a particular piece of what you have to give specifically to Jewish causes, to me, was extremely compelling. Like the little blue box that our parents grew up with, where it was just something everybody did.
That's one of the things that the pledge can do. It's a great way for the generations to connect and to do things together and to join together.
And it was so natural for us to be able to sit down and say that to them.
And then I said, well, why can't we do that? Why can't everybody do that? To make a pledge that they would have a part of the Jewish future to recover the little blue box again. I'm not doing it for my legacy. My legacy are the 3 sons that you saw today. My grandchildren are from them, that what they teach them is my legacy. When those people sign, it's their legacy, not Mike Levin's legacy.
I'm Rob.
I'm John.
I'm Adam.
And
I signed the Jewish Future Pledge.
Well, should I start?
Go right ahead, Mike.
First of all, let me just say thank you to everybody. This is the first time that I've spoken to a group of advisors who are really the most important people in this project. It was really by accident, as the video said. We've been giving charitably Jewish for quite a number of years. And in fact, after this meeting, I'm sitting on the birthright board for the 9th year, which comes up my whole afternoon this afternoon. So I'm still involved on a day-to-day basis. And what we found out was that in the 2 years I've been doing this project, after we decided to start the Jewish Future Pledge, lots of people who are very Jewishly committed have not really even discussed the matters with their children as to what they may be leaving for charitable purposes. And it could be $10, it could be 100,000, it could be 10 million. They go about their business with their spouse and they do their Jewish work. And everybody on this call, I'm sure, is involved because they're all here and they're doing Jewish work if they wouldn't be involved with Metro West, et cetera. And many have not talked to their children. Many have not made plans at the end of life for what might happen, either with a legacy gift, which many foundations do in the Jewish world, or a gift, which I think is even more important, which is distributing money to your children to be charitable and to be charitable in a Jewish way and teaching them while they're alive, whether they're adult children, teenage children, or whatever, that they have a responsibility to support the Jewish people and the state of Israel after they're gone, after your parents are gone or grandparents are gone or what have you. And we set up an organization with a 501c3, of which I'm the only funder. And we've been talking to lots and lots of people. Today, we're over 2,400 pledges that have been signed. And we also have a sub-brand called the Jewish Youth Pledge, which deals with teenagers and does not deal with wealth, it deals with personal commitment, where over 3,000 young people have already signed. So we're on our way, and we've worked with foundations, we've worked with individuals. We work with also people in their 30s and 40s, young people, and people like my children who are in their 50s or early 50s, who signed and that make their consciousness about giving Jewishly and carrying on the responsibility of Lador Vador. So you advisors who are helping people, and strangely enough, even the ones who did my planning, when I was sitting down with my wealth advisors, no one ever mentioned it. They mentioned philanthropy for a foundation or personal giving, but they don't mention what are you doing as far as your children are concerned? How are they going to carry on your level of commitment to the Jewish people? And so the pledge is just a vehicle in the planning discussion to say, did you think about this? Did you think about motivating your children? You probably bar mitzvah them, you probably sent them to Jewish camp, you probably sent them on birthright. But do they know they have an obligation at the end of life to be able to take some of the assets that you're leaving, if you are in fact leaving them for charitable purposes, that they devoted at least 50%. We don't want our children not to save whales, not to worry about the environment, not to do all those other kinds of things. And that's fine. And so that's why we set the number at 50. And I think it's just from your standpoint, as you're dealing with clients, and many checked off the box, they're dealing with philanthropy. The question is, what philanthropy are you going to leave afterwards for your children and the education, even of your grandchildren? So that's what it is. It's pretty simple. It's a moral commitment. It's not a legal commitment, but you planners can put it into legal situation of saying, that's what you do. And all of you know it's very hard to run the world after you're gone because you've had those discussions. But even a little teaching will really help us. And the Pew study indicated we have some danger we're facing. And this is not about the rise in anti-Semitism. It's not about the Hamas war. It's not about political discussions. It's about what's the obligation to ensure the fact that what we did for the Jewish people while we're alive carries on after us. And that's the simple explanation about what the Jewish Future Pledge does. And the website, the one that you saw, the video, there were two videos on that website. The first one indicates how you can sign. What you can do, it's pretty simple. But in your case, the members, the 32 or 30, let's say 62 people that are on this call, as of the number I'm looking at, you have the responsibility to just ask the question, what do your clients think about what's going to happen in the Jewish world after they're gone? And then lead them to just signing it, and then you can do whatever you want with it. You can do it in a donor advised fund. You can do it in a trust. You can do it just with cash and avoid the tax. So it's something that I'm sure you're professional at doing. And I hope it gives you another tool in your toolbox to have that discussion about the Jewish future.
Thank you so much, Mike. We're going to take another quick poll, our poll number 2. Generally speaking, who typically initiates philanthropic conversations in the advisor-client setting? Always or usually the advisor, equally by both, or always usually the client? According to a US trust survey from 2018, while 80% of advisors surveys state they fall into categories A or B above, always or both, 61% of high net worth individuals surveyed state that they're the ones who usually initiate the charitable conversation. So that's interesting result there. Now we're going to do a number 3 quick poll. Are you involved in charitable conversations with your clients' next generation? Yes. No, my clients speak with their next gen about charitable planning without my involvement. Or no, I don't know if next gen is involved in the conversation. And most of you are saying yes. So now I'm going to turn this over to Don and ask, how do you, as a financial advisor to wealthy clients, typically introduce the topic of charity to your clients during a conversation about financial and estate planning?
Thank you, Anita. It's my pleasure to share how I typically do it. My clients, I guess, didn't answer that survey because they all would say both or yes. I can't think of a client who was the one who raised philanthropy. So look, it's our conversations with clients are very organic. For most of my clients, the key question for most people, will I run out of money, is not an issue. For most of my clients, not all of them, but for most of my clients, that's not an issue. But nevertheless, that's an exercise we go through to try and identify how much do they need for their own lifestyle support for the rest of their lives. And we assume a much longer than actual expected lifespan for our clients. And so then you have excess, then you have additional assets. But even on a more fundamental level, from the very first meeting, before someone is a client, I ask about their philanthropic activity. I ask, it's an organic part. And I share my own philanthropic activity. There we go. Even before, you can leave this page up, but even before someone is a client, and then we sort of engage in some form or another of this conversation, it's for me a key part of getting to know who someone is, and for them to know who I am, to see if there's a fit, to see if there's a match. And I myself am very involved in all sorts of Jewish philanthropy, and that comes right out in the first conversation. So it's my door opener, right? By talking about myself and the things that I'm passionate about. I'm very involved with Maccabi USA. I'm the former president of my temple. Many of you know I used to work in the federation system, so it's almost impossible to get to know me from the very beginning and not know that I'm very committed to Jewish philanthropy myself. It opens the door. It opens the door for a conversation. And so for all of my clients, one way or another, it's rare that it's quite this formal. Oh, hold on, I got to turn that off. It's rare that it's this formal, but these are the elements, right? For me, my job is not to prescribe what people should do, or even which charity to give to. I personally feel that that's potentially crossing a line, but it is my job to fully explore this. And to the extent that people are, as you said, Anita, you asked the question, which charities you give to, that they're at all connected Jewishly, that they are obviously Jewish. There is an opportunity to bring this up, but first is this much bigger question. Where does philanthropy fit into your life? What kind of philanthropy is most important to you? What are your values? How much do you want to leave your kids? How much is too much? Do you want to support philanthropy now or in the future? How involved do you want the next generation in these conversations? So to the extent clients are interested, we structure, family value conversations. It sounds a little hokey, but we have a deck of cards with different values. It's very powerful for families that go through this who frankly have never had the kind of conversation Mike had with his kids about what's important to them. So we just see this as part of our job of helping clients make their money meaningful and to accomplish the key objectives to them. One of the key things I love to say to clients, look, you have enough money to get by, but you could spend more if you want. You could give more to your kids and others. You can give more to philanthropy, or you can give more to the government. Those are basically your choices. And from there, we kind of say, well, I don't want to give more money to the government. And so often it helps us bring a full circle. Well, there are ways that you can express your passion for different philanthropies, do it in a smart, tax-wise way. And so we get to this conversation in many ways. And for those clients who are Jewish and who are Jewishly connected, it's a natural to sort of introduce this idea. Did you know about the Jewish Future Pledge? Sadly, many of my ultra high net worth clients are not that philanthropic, Jewish or otherwise. For me, that was a shock. Growing up with a kid with not a lot of money, philanthropy was always an important part, the blue box or whatever else it was. But sadly, that's not true for many of my very wealthy clients, Jewish and otherwise. But I force the conversation at least in general terms, about philanthropy. Where does it fit in your priorities? I help show how cost effective it is. I had a conversation earlier today with a client, very sophisticated woman, very successful in business. I'm not really that focused on philanthropy, she said. All I give is $5,000 or $10,000 a year. And we had convinced her at one point to set up a donor advised fund. It made a lot of sense from based on her assets and the level she was giving and the changes that we were recommending that were going to generate significant capital gains. We had that conversation again today because her first a dollar she put the donor advised fund, she wrote a check. And I was like, well, why'd you do that? We just explained that basically it would cost you 25 cents on the dollar to put money at this donor advised fund and enable you to not only give during your life, but to set up a fund for your kids to give as well. So maybe we can go to the next slide. So the key is a team, and I somewhat immodestly put myself and my partner, Ben Lehrhoff, at the top of the page. We're often, I think some of you know Ben, who are in Metro West. We are often working with attorneys like Anita, accountants, the folks at the local Jewish Community Foundation. That's the best team. It turns out best for clients when there is a whole team working to help a donor, a client, accomplish their objectives. And you're lucky when you have a team like this. And I know all of you here are either connected to your local Jewish Federation, maybe working for them. You get this, but from the days when I was in the Jewish Federation system to now, it's quite clear to me that that's as true as it ever was. And then there's a process, again, that we go through with families to talk about what is most important to them. And again, it's a tricky balance here to not cross a line. I have my priorities, but I can't impose them on clients, but I certainly can open the door. And when there is an open door, I often make our way through it. And then ultimately, if someone is making gifts during life, to help them think about how to measure the impact and is it what they wanted. I have one family who we helped set up a foundation, and the G1, the parent generation, now the grandparent generation, very connected Jewishly, and they set up their foundation, 75% has to go Jewish. Well, the kids are not that happy with it, frankly. And so what often happens in our annual meetings is, well, what do you mean by Jewish? And what is a Jewish cause? And so I don't know, Mike, if you've dealt with this, but that comes up a lot. And because it's got a Jewish name on it, because it serves Jewish people, it's a pretty broad definition of what it means to be a Jewish cause. No, Mike, have you found that?
Yeah, I've had that question, a number of people, and I've also had a situation where foundations or donor advised fund owners have actually said their kids objected to the 50%. And some have negotiated with their children on that basis. We particularly advise people not to, I was asked by some very important Jewish people to put a list of charities. I did not want to do that. I think that's really a wrong approach. I think as long as it's a Jewish, somebody said to me, well, I want to give to a hospital and there are Jewish doctors there. So I said, well, why don't you give to a Jewish hospital? So, I mean, there's some very interesting stuff happens. I was willing to really take the risk, as you said, Don. You can't direct somebody to do something other than say Jewish. If they'll find a Jewish cause, and for example, if you like animals, there's plenty of Jewish causes with animals. There's plenty of Jewish causes with everything. And then I also had the question, and I'm sure all of you got this. If you have there are significant organizations that you may not agree with politically in the Jewish world. That's not my decision to make. The decision to make is what happens when the children make their decisions. And I think the children will grow up, make wise decisions for the great majority of time. And if they keep them with a J in front of it, I think it'll do the job. that will eliminate the risk of having them do nothing. And that's more important to me. So that's what I found, exactly the same thing that you're talking about.
No, but thanks, Mike. And I just want to finish up quickly on the last slide. And to your point, if you look, advance one more slide. In the bottom left corner, there's sort of the typical categories of philanthropic giving. And to Mike's point, there are faith is one of those categories, but there clearly are in education, in human rights. There are clearly things that are Jewish causes that fit into all of these categories. And working with Next Generation as we do, it's critical that, to Mike's point, we not be narrow-minded about exactly what we mean by Jewish causes, and we help kids, environment. There's a lot of Jewish causes that are dedicated to the environment. So anyway, I just didn't want to leave without this. This is our sort of legacy. When we get to legacy, I think to Anita's point, often people who are currently giving sort of never connect the two, and they certainly never connect the appropriate magnitude, right? So people give $5,000 a year away, they leave $5,000 in their will. And I said, well, that's not how it works. When you give from the estate, you're giving from your assets. Your assets are typically 20 to 30 times your annual income. You should think 20 to 30 times your current annual giving. So anyway, I've said enough. I know we want to get into a lot more stuff. So Anita, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Don. We're going to go to our fourth poll question now. When should advisors first bring up the topic of philanthropy? At your first meeting? After a few meetings of discussing needs? After several meetings when fully understand the needs, or not sure? I have to say I agree at the first meeting, because we don't often have lots of meetings when we're doing estate planning. We might have a couple of meetings, and so it's something that we probably want to get out there right at the beginning. And 58% of high net worth clients surveyed answered a combination of A or B at the first, or at least the first few meetings. Now I'm going to turn it over to Ed Beckwith, our estate planning attorney, and ask, why is this a particularly good time to raise charity with your clients as part of their estate planning process as their estate planning attorney?
Well, Anita, thank you. Thank you for asking the question. What we're talking about is our conversation with our donors and our clients. And there's no easier time to start a conversation when then there's a period of uncertainty or change. And we have experienced a lot of uncertainty in the financial markets, political markets, and a lot of change when it comes to taxes and finances over the last several decades. And we are in one of those periods now. Anybody who turns on the news or reads the paper knows that Congress has been struggling with passing a budget reconciliation bill, which would have a number of tax provisions in it. And our clients are aware of this, and they're asking us about it. So it's an ideal time to have the conversation. And whenever we have the conversation, we obviously can address the pledge. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on in Washington right now. Just a quick overview. And our first slide is entitled The Legislative Dance. And it has to do with what we're experiencing right now, which is the legislative process. We all know about the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill. And then we also have the budget building and reconciliation bill. And for a variety of political reasons, these two bills have been tied together. So far, we have seen what the House would like to do with regard to taxes, raising taxes in order to pay for some of the programs, both for soft infrastructure, as well as for environmental issues and climate control issues. And their proposals include basically four categories, and that is corporate and international provisions, which is where the bulk of the revenue would be raised. There are also tax increases on high income individuals. You'll remember that when President Biden was campaigning, he was promising that there would be tax increases only on people with incomes over $100,000. And in fact, these House proposals carve out tax increases only for people essentially over $450,000. There are also some rules about how much higher income individuals can hold within their retirement accounts. And there's a range of other provisions which are very bipartisan, having to do with further reforms in the qualified benefit area, particularly the retirement account area. Now, this is what the House has been looking at, but of course, the Senate has a view of all this as well, and their concept is not quite as well developed. But let's go back to the details of the House bill as they would relate to our donors. And so on the next slide, which has the details of the House provisions, we can see that on the income tax side, the House is proposing to raise the marginal rate, that's the highest rate applicable to individuals for their income, back to the pre-2008 rate of 39.6%. This is not a significant boost since it's currently 37%, and we'd restoring again that 39.6% rate is the top. There is a proposal to create a surcharge for people who have income over $5 million, basically adjusted gross income of over $5 million a year, and that would be a 3% surcharge on that bonus amount of income. There is also a proposal to raise the capital gains rate from what is now 20% to 25%. That would still be a historic low relative to all of the rates that have been applicable. And then there would be a limitation on how much income people who are involved in business can exclude because that income is coming from a qualified business. There would be a cap on who can benefit from that and how much they can benefit from that. So that's the income tax proposals on the House side. On the transfer tax side, that's gift, estate, generation skipping transfer taxes. There is a proposal to terminate the temporary increase in the unified credit. The unified credit is now at $11.7 million per person due to this temporary doubling of the amount that's available. The proposal would return us back to the historic statutory level of $5 million adjusted for inflation. If that were to occur, then on January 1st of 2022, that unified credit would no longer be 11.7, it would be $6,020,000 per person, or roughly $12 million per couple. There is a proposal to eliminate any valuation discounts with respect to non-business assets. So if I were to create an enterprise that only held my stocks and bonds, and I and my children were involved in that enterprise together, that holding company would no longer be eligible for any form of deduction in value, reduction in value, because of minority discounts or lack of marketability or any of the other factors that normally would generate a legitimate reduction adjustment in value due to those factors. But there would be, as a trade-off for all of this, an increase in the amount of value reduction that people with farms and small businesses could take if those farms and small businesses stayed within the family after death and were used as farms and small businesses. And now they would be protecting up to $11.7 million of value. That is a significant trade-off, frankly, to eliminate any discussion about how these other proposals might tax family farms and small family businesses out of existence. That has been an argument that has been raised historically in the past, despite the fact there has been little factual basis in reality. You will notice the House is not proposing to increase the transfer tax rate above the current flat 40%. Probably the area which is of most concern to planners right now is some of the House proposals that have to do with so-called grantor trusts. These are trusts that I create that are usually irrevocable, to which I transfer assets, but because of some of the provisions I put in the trust, it is still treated as if the assets in the trust were my assets, and as a result, all items of income, deduction, and credit with respect to those trusts are still reflected on my personal tax return. The value to families who are planning wealth transfers is that the trust that I've created that is irrevocable, that is now out of my estate, is going to grow tax-free because I am obligated under the tax laws to pay the tax, and I am reducing my estate by satisfying that legal obligation to pay that tax. The new rules would impact two areas of grantor trusts. One is an estate tax inclusion rule, which would provide that if I created a grantor trust after the date of enactment of these new tax rules, that is, the date that the president signs the bill and it becomes law, after the date of enactment, if I created a grantor trust, all of the assets that I then put into that trust would be reflected and included in my estate for estate tax purposes. And unlike what we have had historically, where I can freely have business transactions between me and my grantor trust because we are treated as one and the same, the rule will now be that in fact, business transactions between me and my grantor trust will be subject to certain income tax rules, which will basically cause tax to be paid at the time that some of those transactions occurred. The rules, even as they are spelled out in the House legislation, are complicated. They are somewhat confusing, and their apparent breadth is very broad. Their application is very broad. I have been telling clients and other attorneys who will listen and accountants who will listen that at the present time, if you plan with anything that has an acronym, like a SLAT or a GRAT, it is time to pause and watch how these rules develop. Now, as I said, the Senate also has a view, and they have not yet put into effect. We will go to the next slide, which is entitled "The Senate Has a Voice and Its Own Views." Here, it is possible that they will propose an increase from 40% to some higher rate for estate and gift tax purposes and generation skipping transfer tax purposes as well. They have also have before them some proposals with regard to capital gains, the most far-reaching of which is to have a capital gains tax at death, gift, or transfer. This would essentially create a significant amount of revenue, far more than some of the House proposals would generate. And as a compromise, some are suggesting that because the Senate might consider something so revolutionary, that they might just bring us back to carryover basis. As you will recall, if I were to give a share of stock to Anita today that is highly appreciated, Anita would take whatever tax basis I have in that share of stock. But if I were to leave that same share of stock to Anita in my will, then her basis would be whatever that stock was worth on the day I died. There is an inconsistency there in tax policy. Carryover basis, which is what we use for the gift, would also then be used for the bequest. So watch this space for further announcements about that. There is also in the Senate right now some proposals having to do with charity, whereas charity is unaffected currently by what is in the House bill. The Senate has a bill in front of it where they are considering some additional limitations and restrictions on both donor advised funds and private foundations in an attempt to accelerate the amount of dollars that have to come out of those charitable giving devices. But we have to watch this space for further announcements. So finally, in our last slide, everyone wants to know, when will all of this be effective? Because all you read in the paper and all you see in the news at night is that Congress can't seem to get out of its own way with these two pieces of legislation. The conventional wisdom, as one who practices law in Washington, D.C. and tries to keep track of this, is that this may not occur until sometime after Thanksgiving, even though there's a lot of talk that they want to have this done in the next week or two. That seems legislatively impossible at this point. But there is a significant benchmark in early December when once again they have to return to the debt ceiling issue, which is the third leg of this stool. And there will come a point at which something must occur. It is still expected that a smaller budget reconciliation bill with tax provisions, along with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, will pass this year. But if it comes down to crunch time, then the wisdom shifts to just the bipartisan infrastructure bill and an increase in the debt ceiling, with the budget reconciliation process actually being kicked into next year. Now, how are these changes impacting our planning? Well, as I said before, anything that you've used that has an acronym is likely a target for these grantor trust provisions, and therefore you must look at them carefully. And what should we be doing right now? Well, looking at what our clients have. Do they have grantor trusts? Do they have grantor trusts already fully funded where you could turn off grantor trust status if you wanted to? Should you wait and see? Should you wait and see to put anything more in those grantor trusts? What are you going to do about an irrevocable life insurance trust that is currently a grantor trust, that where you still have premiums that need to be paid? Studying what your clients have, creating that inventory, putting them on alert, and starting to draft templates of what you would do under circumstance A, B, or C is probably where you want to be, because there are only 24 hours in the day and there are only so many days left once we find out what's going on and what we are going to have to do. So again, I say clients know that there's something going on. They want to know what it is. They want to know what it is they should be doing. And right now, that's all I think we can tell them. Anita, back to you.
Well, so the question is, what should we be telling them? What should we be telling them? So I'm going to open it up for Don, Ed, Mike, and I to chat about what are we telling them? What are we going forward with?
If I can just jump in, I think it's true, and Ed and Anita, you could confirm or deny, but for those clients who have assets well in excess of 22 million, 25 million, 50 million, there's a mad rush one way or another to use up the full $11.7 million deduction. I assume neither you're getting much sleep lately, because my clients, when they finally call their attorneys, they're like, they could hardly get through. So it's not specifically an incentive to do charitable giving, but in those conversations, to Ed's point, a change creates opportunity. Almost always with my clients, philanthropy comes up. The goal is to use up the full 11.7, but as you get into other parts of that conversation, like, oh my God, I'm going to leave $23 million in a trust for my kid. You're going to invest it aggressively. We're not going to touch it for 10, 15, 20 years. Oh my God, I don't want them to have that much. And so it opens a door for conversations about, well, how can you reduce the likely taxes on your estate in ways other than just finding ways to use up the 11.7.
Yeah, the question is, when is enough enough?
Yeah.
And that for many clients, that's a moving target. But there is a point at which most clients, at least most of the clients I've been exposed to directly and indirectly, say, yeah, that's more than enough. And some clients say, I started with nothing, and I don't want to spoil them, and I don't want to deprive them of the opportunity to feel as though they've accomplished in their lives. So I'm going to give them a little boost. I'm going to give them a start. I always want them to have good health care. I always want them to have an education and to educate their children. But beyond that, it's really their responsibility and their sense of self-satisfaction. So what do I do with the rest of it? Well, I can fund all sorts of ways that, as Mike was saying, they can be philanthropists. They can be philanthropists with my donor advised fund if I've added them as advisors. They can be philanthropists with my private foundation or supporting organization if they're on the board of those organizations. So all three of those, donor advised funds, private foundations, supporting organizations, are a wonderful way to introduce my children and my grandchildren to philanthropy. And as Mike was saying, introduce them to what was of value to me, not to hand tie them, because who knows what the needs will be in the future, but for them to be an extension of what was valuable to me, and to take that second look, that third look, that 10th look as to what is the need in the Jewish community, and to tie them back to the Jewish community, even for those who may no longer be active in the Jewish community. It gives them a tie back. So that's sort of the thematic. And Anita, you and Don and I and Mike can talk a little bit about some of the techniques that we might employ, like in the next few weeks, to use some of that bonus money. But I think thematically, Don touched on the most important part, which is, when is enough enough? How do you gauge that? And yes, the pledge gives us the perfect way to focus it, because as Mike has described it, it's not a commitment to my synagogue or to my federation. It's a commitment to my people. And that could not be broader. I defy people to say that you can't find just about anything that isn't Jewish when it comes to the things that people use their philanthropic dollars to support. But Anita, what are some of the things that occur to you that we might be using like right now?
Well, the one thing I would say to start is the discussion about using up the $11.7 million exemption is a different discussion than the charitable discussion. Because if I'm giving to charity, I'm not using the exemption. And for most people, they don't have enough to give away 23 million and still have enough to live on, right? That's a very large client. And so we need to make sure we're making that distinction. The using up the lifetime exemption or the bonus exemption, the exemption over the 6 million, is one client. But I think if we want to focus on what we're discussing with our clients about charitable causes and using our charitable dollars, what we think are our charitable dollars, there are some wonderful vehicles for us to discuss with them, and that can lead to discussion of the Jewish Future Pledge. And those, my favorite one is always the Charitable Remainder Trust, because it has so many wonderful uses, and the Donor Advised Fund for the acceleration, because of the problem with the itemized deductions that we have right now that doesn't seem to be getting addressed in the current legislation, because of our problems with itemized deductions when we live in a state like New Jersey or New York, where we have the limitations on the state property tax and state income tax. So the Donor Advised Fund and the Charitable Remainder Trust are my two favorites. Much better than trying to quickly set up a private family foundation or supporting foundation. And I don't know, Ed, if you're feeling the same love for these two kinds of entities as I am. And for me, the Charitable Remainder Trust in particular, paired up with what the Secure Act has done to the large IRAs, and a lot of our clients have the large IRAs, that's where I'm focusing a lot of time for our clients. What about you, Ed?
Yeah, no, I think, look, I think before if there's going to be grantor trust rules before they take effect, I could now fund a very substantial charitable remainder annuity trust. And that would provide me or others that I designate with income for a period of time, and would then provide a charitable benefit at the back end. I think people should be thinking about that right now. For all the reasons we've recommended charitable remainder trusts in the past, get in under the wire before we have new grantor trust rules, and load one up. The charitable remainder annuity trust can be very powerful. Obviously, if the donor is younger, we have to be careful about the requirement that at least 10% of the value be ascribed to the personal benefit that to at least 10% has got to be ascribed to the charitable benefit at the back end. But you can still do an enormous charitable remainder trust with that rule. That said, the whole idea of a charitable IRA rollover is very powerful, and people are very confused right now because they don't need to take their minimum distributions till they're 72, but the old rule that you can do this once you're 70 and a half still applies. And even if the House bill goes through and they push the minimum required distribution to 75, the 70 and a half will still apply. So many people can take advantage of that and move charitable dollars that way. Particularly for people who are not itemizing, it's a way of basically avoiding what will eventually be taxable dollars. There is something that's occurred to me recently that could be, for a much wealthier donor, could be very powerful. It's one of the acronyms that I think will survive, even if we have these grantor trust rules. And that is a charitable lead uni trust, which is not a grantor trust, because people sometimes make lead trusts grantor trusts. But if you have a non-grantor charitable lead uni trust, you can then apply your GST exemption, and you can apply it dollar for dollar. There's not a second look, the way we have it with the charitable lead annuity trust. And the net result is that we may be able to pass significant dollars down to the next generation. Because even though it's hard to zero out a unit trust, it is possible with $11.7 million to have an enormous amount being put into a lead trust. And by the way, that lead trust could be funding my family foundation, so long as I am walled off from making decisions about how the dollars that come from the lead trust to the private foundation are invested and distributed. And if this is all about the next generation, what better way to fund up their charitable opportunities and my charitable legacy than by using that? So if I have great wealth, discretionary wealth, I've reached the point where enough is enough. That is something that actually some people may want to be thinking about before the end of the year. So Anita, that would be some of my thoughts.
Let's just let people know all of the attendees are getting an outline of the various charitable vehicles that are available, because we've thrown some names around: charitable lead trust, charitable remainder trust, donor advised fund. You're getting an outline that describes all of the different aspects of it, what they are and how they're used, that you'll have the opportunity, because they can be confusing and sound very similar if we just talk about them. So you'll have that opportunity to look at those. And don't forget, you have a lot of help in your community through your local community Jewish Federation, your Jewish Community Foundation, to help guide you to find the best Jewish charities to satisfy your goals and your clients' goals, and to help you find the best vehicles there. But those are some other thoughts. Don or Mike, were you going to raise something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a client. I mean, I'm a customer, basically. I'm not a planner. So I'm listening to all these conversations, and there are certainly a lot of people with significant wealth that you deal with, but there are a lot of people with $5 million or $10 million. And a lot of the people on this call are going to be dealing with those people also. I'm very fortunate. I had a foundation. I said I was going to spend it in my lifetime. I spent it. And now I have to, I'm spending my own money. And I deal with a lot of young people and people, and also people who are in the $5 to $10 million category. They're important. They support the federations. They support the synagogues. They support the state of Israel. They buy Israel bonds. They do all these kinds of things, and they're going to leave some money. So so here's what I did myself. I said, look, I'm going to tithe some money to my children. Just tithe it. I said, I'm going to take 10% after I die and put into 3 donor advised funds. 10%. So if you're leaving 5 million, it's 500,000. If you leave whatever. And I said 50% of that has to be spent Jewishly. And there's 3 donor advised funds that they have to do it. So it's just a little thing that doesn't involve the government, doesn't involve anything, at least today it doesn't. God knows what's going to happen later. So I'm just saying, it's another suggestion. It's not very complex. It's in the will. And it says 10% is going to be given this way into 3 donor advised funds. And the children will have those donor advised funds, and they have to be, and it's set aside. And it's right now, at least you don't pay tax on it. It avoids any estate tax if you do have it. Now, people who are in the $5 million, $10 million, they may not have any estate tax, because basically if the exemption is $5.5 million per person, they may not even have any. But it doesn't make any difference. It's just another way of passing on something to your family to say, this is what I've done for you. Here's what I wanted to do. And to have that conversation at Passover or Rosh Hashanah or at Hanukkah or at some other holiday or at a bar mitzvah and say that. So I just don't, I know this is for people with large money and large wealth, which many of you deal with. And I happen to be one of those fortunate people. But I wanted to make sure that I had something to say to somebody that's a little bit smaller, because some people can't think in those kind of terms. And God knows, Ed, you were talking about exemptions. You don't know that they may take away the exemption. They may raise the estate tax to 60%, to 70%. It was at one time, I think 90%. I don't remember all that stuff. But I just would leave it with the people on this call, because many are young. They're going to have young clients. They're not going to have the multi-$100 million, $50 million over the exemption alone. And by the way, I spent all my exemption, just so you know. I took it out.
Good. I was going to call you, Mike.
It's all gone. It's all gone. So, I did it, and I did it in different ways and whatever. But because I didn't want to take a chance anymore. I'm going to be 84 years old in November. And so I said, let's get rid of this thing, not take a chance with it. Who knows what guy, it doesn't make whether you're a different Democrat, Republican, who knows what's going to happen.
Mike, point very well taken. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
There people can participate at all levels, and that's a great way to do it.
All those, I ran into a guy. I hate to take the time to say, but this guy's a chiropractor in New York City. I was at a dinner or something, and he heard my speech, and he said, "You know what? I run this thing called $1 a day." I said, "$1 a day what?" He said, "I get people to give $1 a day to Jewish causes." I said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, how do you do it?" "Yeah, I use the internet. I do all this thing." He raises like $10 million a year with people giving him $1 a day, and he spends 100% of the money Jewishly. And it's the most amazing thing on the internet. So I said, well, that's great, because a lot of people for $1 a day, it's like putting the money in the blue box. That's what it is. So I wouldn't forget all those, and I wouldn't forget that conversation, because the people who were doing 10% of their will today with a client may be a person with $50 million 10 years from now or 20 years from now. So I just would leave that as my last.
Mike, I couldn't agree more. And I think part of the beauty of the Jewish Future Pledge, it's not 50% of your estate. It's 50% of the dollars that you leave to charity. And so really, this is the way it's structured. Thank you very much. It enables one to speak to people no matter their level of wealth. So this idea of tithing of 10%, whatever it is, if you have $1 million, you don't need $5 million, but to have as a part of your values, your objectives, to leave 10% behind either directly to Jewish charities, or if appropriate in some sort of vehicle that your kids can distribute, but to have a restriction in there. But either is fine, right? There are, right? Both of them work. Hopefully, this silly legislation in the Senate that would limit the use of donor advised funds for this purpose, because they They sunset after 15 years. So an existing donor advised fund, potentially wouldn't be available for the kids to use. But hopefully, it doesn't sound like that has a lot of support, but anyway, we don't want to get into that because I'm going to get hot under the collar.
And
But
don't get me started either.
yeah, okay. But anyway, I just wanted to compliment you, Mike, because you're 100% right. The way this Jewish Future Pledge is structured, really anyone at any level of wealth can sign this. I'm leaving $100 to charity, 50 is going to go to Jewish. Okay, you're in.
We want our families to create their own family little blue box. That's
Right, right. Anita, you've got a final poll.
I have a final poll. The question is, do you have materials on hand?
Auction.
Do you have materials on hand to give to clients who are interested in philanthropy? Yes, no, or don't know. I'm glad to see that most of you do yes. And to let you know again that you're going to have some materials from us that will help you with what you want to give to people. And you'll have other things from Federation that you can give to them. I want to let you know also that you're going to be getting a quick survey. We're going to ask you to do that. A quick survey is going to pop up as soon as you exit our program today. We want to thank you for joining us, and hopefully you get a lot out of this and the materials that you're going to get from us. And thank you to our speakers, Don, Ed, and Mike. And thanks, Evan, for his technology. And thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you, Anita.
Everybody, thanks very much, everybody. Good luck.
Yep.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.